If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me and subscribe to me on all my other social media platforms. What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another album review for you guys. This time, I'm talking about another big album that came out this year, and this is one that came out yesterday on October 7th, and that is, of course, the latest offering from Lamb of God with Omens. Of course, Lamb of God's one of the biggest bands in the world going today, and have been for almost 20 years now, as they just continue to just tour excessively and sell a lot of albums and merch, and just kick ass in general. And of course, this is their latest offering, only 2 years after their self-titled that came out in 2020, which, full disclosure, wasn't the biggest fan of the self-titled. I thought it was just there, and I think a lot of people share that sentiment. So with this new album, what I'm hoping for is that there was more to offer for me as a Lamb of God fan than the self-titled did. Well, did it? Well, let's find out. So we kick things off with Nevermore, and I love how in the beginning you get these aggressive, almost sludgy riffs and beats right out of the gate, which was really cool. And then, like, even in the verses of the song, like, Randy's vocals are kind of going every direction you can think of. Like, low spoken words, slight clean vocals, and his trademark shout and growl, which I always love hearing from Randy. And, of course, like, the riff that actually comes in here, like, there are some standout riffs throughout this album, but there was one standout riff coming into the bridge on this song that was really, really catchy. And this actually is one of the few songs of the album where you get a lead section. And Mark throws down an almost kind of bluesy guitar lead, which was something I didn't expect to hear out of Lamb of God at this point. Granted, you did hear like a bluesy lead in the beginning of the song Overlord off of my personal favorite Lamb of God album, Seven Sturm und Drang, but didn't expect to hear it on this song right at the beginning of the album. But still, it was a really cool moment for me on this song, and a cool moment on the album. Then it gets into Vanishing, the second track, and you get these pretty much, like, this song has like an almost melodic death metal feel, because a lot of the riffs that I hear on this song in particular feel very At the Gates inspired. But then, like, even like the pre-choruses kind of remind me a little bit of As I Lay Dying, with how they would use hardcore grooves with melodic progressions to build up tension within the track. It does get thrashy a little bit in this track, in the bridge, which anytime Lamb of God gets down and dirty with the thrash side of their sound, I'm all for it. Then we get to the song To the Grave, which starts out very thrashy, and it felt like a Lamb of God song, like with the guitars being in D, I believe, on this track, or in drop C, but they're sounding like it's in D, at least with the structuring and the writing. But yeah, very thrashy opening, and it stays thrashy for the most part, while still maintaining that classic Lamb of God groove that you get. But I like how, at the start of the second verse on this track, the bass actually has a moment of shine on the song, because when John Campbell's just playing along with the guitars, it's hard to hear the bass on its own at times, because when you're just following along with the guitars, it's kind of difficult unless like the bass was mixed a little higher. And I do wish the bass could have been mixed a little bit higher so you could actually hear it more prominent throughout the album. But it does have a cool bass line at the beginning of the second verse on this track. And then, well, actually, no, this wasn't in D tuning. What am I talking about? It was still in C tuning. I'll talk more about with the overall vibe of the guitars at the end. I can never get a full thought out properly anymore, it seems. But I digress even further with that. And I do like how, towards the end of this song, To the Grave, There is another lead that shows up, and it starts off squealy, kind of like Slayer, but then it turns kind of atmospheric, but it does kind of fade in the background a little bit, which I understand it's more to provide that atmospheric backdrop, but I would have loved to have heard it more up front, if that makes sense. Then we get into the track Ditch, and right out of the gate, feels like Decapitated, because you get a little bit more technical riff work and drums that are going on here. But then even along with that, like, Decapitated feel, this track has a lot of Meshuggah laced all throughout, like, especially in the choruses, and then, like, even in the breakdown, when you got, like, this dissonant melodic guitar line on top of that breakdown, and it felt like something you would hear from a band like Meshuggah, or even, like, Born of Osiris to some extent. But I do like how there's another, like, sudden mood shift that happens towards the end of the track as well. Then we get into the title track. This song, to me, is one of the few tracks that sounds like classic Lamb of God in the guitars, because it's in D tuning, because if anybody knows anything about Lamb of God, you would know most of their songs are written in D guitars, and I love that sound. It's one of my favorite guitar tunings to listen to in a band, and this track is packed with brutality all throughout. And I love how towards the middle of the song, when it's building tension, it leads us into, like, almost like a punky inspired thrash section, which was really refreshing, because this track was very much groove centered, which, I mean, groove metal is the wheelhouse of Lamb of God style. Then we get into Gomorrah, which starts off much different compared to the rest of the album. It has this clean melody to set a mood, and even those melodies kind of stay in the background throughout a good chunk of the song. However, you get more of those, like, Decapitated, Meshuggah-inspired beats and riffs, but still groove-oriented more than just, like, a lot of double bass going on. But that feels pretty much felt throughout the entire song. Ill Designs, which was a standout for me on the album, while it's more sinister sounding, it's still I cannot fucking speak today. In the writing, it still is Lamb of God to its core. And, you know, you get, like, thrashy and groovy verses going back and forth, but with those cool, like, melodic guitar progressions in the background again. But then we get into another lead, and this was, for me, probably the best lead of the album, even though it was short. It was packed with thrashy shred all throughout. But I do like how, in the beginning of the track, it has these cool tapping melodies, and those tapping melodies pretty much is laced throughout the whole song. Grayscale, this one is kind of more hardcore, yet death metal, like traditional death metal inspired throughout. Like, even there are moments when the tempo speeds up a little bit, and the riffs that follow along remind me of Blood Red Throne and Cannibal Corpse to some extent. And I do love how the breakdown on this track in particular felt very death metal, and even a blast beat, and I was like, oh, thank you, I was wanting to hear a blast beat on this album, and we got it. Then we get to one of my favorites of the album, and the shortest song of the album, Denial Mechanism, which is just punky and hardcore and thrash. Feels like a Randy song, and I can hear, like, influences from, like, Misfits, Slayer, Cro-Mags, even Exodus, all throughout, and then you get more lead work, but again, it's short. Then we get to the closing track and the longest track of the album at about 6 minutes, September Song, which starts off with this, like, soothing, clean beginning, and it reminded me a little bit of System of a Down to some degree, as it's done to build tension and create a murky mood. And then right into aggression we go, and that aggression is pretty much felt throughout. However, I'm singling out the chorus on this track compared to the rest because, I'll be honest, the choruses on this album were very formulaic in the way it was structured. like in the way they were structured musically. Like, it's just all about groove, and that was it. Whereas here, there's still groove, but it has more emotional weight to it, and those melodic guitars in the background provide an emotional backdrop. And even after the second chorus, you get a cool tapping melody that reminded me of Arch Enemy to some extent, as it leads us through another breakdown, and even gets thrashy a little bit before another beefy breakdown helps conclude the song. And that's the end of the album for you. So like I said, choruses, very formulaic as far as like how they were performed in the groove department. It does work. However, I was kind of hoping, apart from Denial Mechanism, which was very punky in the chorus, I do wish the choruses could have had more, well, not saying remove all the groove, but like some of the choruses I felt could have been benefited with more double bass work, maybe even some more thrash forward stuff. You get what I mean. Like, I wish it was more than just about groove the whole way through. And like I said, not many leads on here, and even those leads we get, they're too damn short. More Morton, please. So that was kind of a thing that I feel drags this album down, is we didn't get really many leads on here. Although, a few positives about the album. I do love the C tuning on the guitars. It gives the album and the songs more of a sinister feel, which I do like. And I do like how they are experimenting with different influences, moods, and even doing more atmospheric stuff, which I don't think of atmosphere when I think Lamb of God, but it still maintains that aggression that Lamb of God projects into your ears. No disrespect to Art Cruz, but I just wish Chris Adler was still in the band, because to me, he's the true heart and soul of Lamb of God, and I feel without his presence on the last album, that was the big reason why that album fell flat to me, is because with no Chris Adler, it just didn't feel like Lamb of God. Here it does feel more like Lamb of God, but it's still missing a little oomph from Chris Adler. Again, no disrespect to Art Cruz, I think he does a very good job drum-wise on this album. I just wish we had the heart and soul of the band back. Maybe he'll be back in the future, I don't know. I wish he was still there, because Chris is such a beast of a drummer, and I think would have done more drum stuff than Art did on this album. So, whenever you combine the pros and the cons, this is still a good album. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. I think it's a good album, much better than the self-titled, but there's still a little something missing from this band. Like, to me, Lamb of God hasn't really been Lamb of God since 7 Sturm und Drang, which ironically was the last album with Chris Adler. Just get Chris Adler back in the band, please. That's all I ask. Again, no disrespect to Cruz. Really good drummer, but he's not Chris Adler. And that's just me. It's kind of like Slayer without Dave Lombardo. That's just my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. But it's still a good album. It's not great. There are some great songs, but they do feel kind of formulaic, like they went back to the well maybe one too many times. But that does it for my review of Omens by Lamb of God. What did you guys think of this album? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, horns high. See you guys later.
I'm very mad right now. You're kidding me. You are kidding me.
Nah.
He was kidding me! Bruh!
No, I'm not.
No!
I win.
Are you kidding me? No!
I had 4.
I was 1 card away!
That
One
was
card!
clutch.
No, dude! Unbelievable. I had 3 7s and a wild card, as well as 3 8s, 2 9s. I was there, dude. No!
So, yeah, it is what it is. But anyways, I whooped his ass.
Boo! Trash game!